The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains. Greetings once again, friends and people that aren't our friends but still listen to the podcast. You are listening to episode 3 of Ghosts in the Mountains, a still brand new podcast about all things paranormal, brought to you by myself, Mr. Caleb Hanks, and my good friend and great co-host, Mr. Austin Burgess. Austin! Oh my God, dude! How are you doing tonight, bro?
I'm doing well tonight. How are you doing this week?
Man, as Doc Holliday would say in Tombstone, Wyatt, I am rolling. And I think that means he's doing very well.
Yeah, I would say so.
Because I am very excited that here we are on episode 3. The weeks are just flying by because I feel like every time I turn around, it's like, heck yeah, dude, we're doing a new episode. Yeah, for those of you who have maybe just somehow stumbled upon this and have not heard of our podcast before, we are essentially doing a podcast that is a little Western North Carolina centric. However, we will at some point branch out into all things ghosts and goblins, and there can be ghosts in valleys, deserts. Hell, your RV could be haunted. Who knows? And we're probably going to get into every single bit of that.
But for now, we're sticking with the mountains.
But for right now, Ghosts in the Mountains, we're staying there, baby. We're going to stay on brand. I'm very excited about this episode because, you know, we're talking about the show being Ghosts in the Mountains. And this episode, we're going to be getting into all kinds of things. There's going to be ghosts. There's going to be some other stuff that's, hell, maybe it is ghosts, maybe it's not ghosts, maybe it's cryptids, who knows? But if you've lived in Western North Carolina as long as Austin and I have, and we've lived here for a very, very long time, we say this all the time, but if you're just tuning in, the Appalachian Mountains in Western North Carolina are literally some of the oldest mountains in the world. And it's had a lot of time for a lot of weird stuff to happen here. And as time goes on, seemingly even weirder stuff happens. And I've experienced some pretty strange stuff in my time in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And actually, I remembered I had a clip on my phone that I was recording while I was on a hike 2 years ago. And it was kind of bizarre. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for everybody right now. Hey there, everybody. I am hiking here in the beautiful mountains of Western North Carolina, and man, it is just a gorgeous, gorgeous day here. But gotten pretty far down in the woods, and I don't know, it's weird. I kind of get the feeling I'm being watched. Anyway, wait, what the hell is that? Oh, holy crap! Oh my God, it's Bigfoot!
Caleb?
What? You can talk? And you know who I am?
Why, yes. I know Alright, I'm gonna be real with you. I was trying to reach you about your extended warranty.
Oh my God, Bigfoot.
I know.
State Farm got to you too?
You know, it's a job. So, like, could I get your email address or something?
Yeah, here's my business card. Just email me whenever. You know, I thought that meeting you was gonna go a lot differently.
I hear that all the time. Anyway, I'll be in touch. And, you know, keep the myth alive. Gotta keep selling the merchandise.
All right, the mythical Bigfoot. See you later, I guess. So, I mean, that just goes to show that literally anything can happen in the western North Carolina mountains.
Quite the anomalous encounter you had there. I don't think I've heard this story from you before, so this was all news to me.
I think I was so traumatized by it that I had to kind of keep it to myself. And
Understandable. Understandable.
But I have to say, I really appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit of the Sasquatch. He's a legend, and he is apparently top of the sales department. So,
Did you get that extended warranty?
to be real, I ghosted him.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
I feel bad. It's like they say never meet your idols, but anyway, obviously, we get a little scary around here, but, we can't be scary all the time. I cannot turn off my sense of humor, and I, every once in a while, have to just let it fly, and you're probably going to run into that a decent amount on this podcast, but that was a 100% real encounter, and I stand by it.
I believe it.
Yeah, I mean, Austin backs me up, and that's all the verification I need. So, but getting into the spirit of anything can happen in the mountains of Western North Carolina kind of reminds me of that song. Do you ever hear that? Can't even remember what that movie was. Like a Halloween movie when we were kids. It's like, anything can happen on Halloween. Did you ever hear this song?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I think it's Tim Curry.
That sounds right. I can't place it, though. The song is bringing back a memory, but I'm not getting any visuals or anything.
Me and the lady used to jam it a lot. We used to sing it around the house quite a bit. But yeah, it's kind of like that. Anything can happen when you're in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And basically, we were wanting to dedicate this episode to an area that, in I think a lot of people's opinion, is somewhat of an epicenter of a place where just anything seems to happen, because it seems like you name it, it's going on around here. And the area in question begins when you're heading out of Asheville, heading out towards Fairview, North Carolina. I have always found that area to be just kind of, I don't want to say out of place, because it very much feels like a place that kind of embodies the spirit of Western North Carolina. But when you're driving out of Asheville and you start heading over towards the area known as Fairview, things just kind of start to look a little different. And by that, I mean, most of the mountains around Asheville in general there's kind of these tree-covered rolling hills. And once you get out towards Fairview, it is strikingly different. There are a lot more rock faces that kind of start to appear interspersed throughout the mountains there. And the further you get out toward an area known as Girton, there seems to be just more and more of this. I have friends that have lived out there over the years that have talked about there's just all kinds of random caves that pop up. And one area that you start to get into is a place called Hickory Nut Gap. And right around there, it starts just getting more rocky and more kind of anomalous. And then you take these kind of switchback roads, which eventually lead to a place called Chimney Rock. Now, in very, very recent times, unfortunately, Hurricane Helene absolutely obliterated the township of Chimney Rock, to the point to where the only road to get into it from where I'm describing right now is still a completely dirt road. The locals and surrounding areas have done every single thing that they possibly can to try to rebuild the area as best as they can, but access to Chimney Rock in general is still very, very limited. And as far as I understand, at least going into Chimney Rock proper, I think it is still kind of this idea of, don't go there unless you are there specifically to help, essentially. They're not allowing random people to get through there, because the terrain to get into the area is still very treacherous.
Correct. And I think businesses are starting to open up, but that's more on a local level. There will come a time when this area does need the tourism support, but as of right now, they're still very much in recovery mode.
Absolutely. And when that area is back and they are just telling people, please come support and, help build this community back, baby, let me tell you, I'm going to be making multiple trips, because before the horrific catastrophe of Hurricane Helene ripped through Chimney Rock, that was a place that I frequented quite a bit.
Definitely.
The adjoining area, and we'll get into this a little tiny bit later, but the adjoining area that's basically right down the road from Chimney Rock is also a little place called Lake Lure. And Lake Lure is, I guess we could kind of say that Chimney Rock and Lake Lure are just, they're so close together that they're essentially one area.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But Chimney Rock is, known because there's a very, very prominent rock structure there with a state park that is built around it. And people come from all over because it's just incredible. Like we were saying, it's like the rockiness of that specific area just grows and grows and gets greater and greater. And it is essentially become not just a beautiful spectacle for people to enjoy just the majesty of nature, but it is also seemingly a focal point for a lot of just kind of strange reports of all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah, I think I've heard a lot of people refer to this area as having magical qualities. Some refer to it as mystical or mythical, and I think that's pretty spot on.
Yeah. And I think when you Google it or you have the chance to go there, you'll kind of know exactly what people are talking about. It's so interesting. I never, ever one time in my entire life went to Chimney Rock, like the actual state park, until last summer.
No joke.
I had been to Lake Lure for years. I had driven by Chimney Rock. I had hung out in the little community down there. Time and time and time again, but I had just throughout my entire life, this is, 40 minutes from home, 45 minutes, an hour with traffic. I had never once just gone up to the state park and gone to actual Chimney Rock. And I think that this is going to be somewhat of a trend with some of the stories that we're talking about, just odd synchronicities and just strange, at least with my personal experiences, but like, it's so bizarre to me. The only time that I would go to Chimney Rock is right before everything gets destroyed. And I cannot tell you how fortunate I feel to be able to say that I got to go there and see it when it was just in its, final form before Helene just completely changed the landscape of that area.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was a few days, maybe a week after Helene had hit, there was a picture that Chimney Rock State Park had posted on their social media, and just knowing the devastation that had happened, you saw trees all down through the roadway leading up to the rock. But the picture they posted was just the monument of the rock with the American flag posted at the top. It is almost a symbol of hope. And I thought that was pretty inspiring.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, just the visage of the rock in general is very inspiring.
Yeah,
it's always got the flag up there. I got to hike up to that point, and the view from up there is absolutely incredible. There are some videos that I saw of some people that were taking those. They're like little motorized gliders, essentially. They're like the big fan with like the glider.
Yeah.
And they were flying through the gorge and just kind of showing all the damage, all the trees that had been downed. And the main road getting in there was adjacent to the river that flows down towards Lake Lure. The road, again, is gone, and the river tripled the size of it. It is truly insane to witness. I have not been there since Helene. I haven't even been to parts of Asheville since Helene. I live right near Biltmore, and I have not even been to Biltmore since Helene. And that was one of the places where the floods just absolutely destroyed. But anyway, we wanted to take a little bit of time to pay tribute to this area and just talk about how amazing and mystical, like Austin was saying, and just strange and everything about this area. It's like it draws people to it. And hopefully with, the help of the podcast, when this town is ready to get back in action, I hope that people listen to some of the stories that we're talking about tonight, and that, piques their interest and allows them to, maybe take a little bit of a road trip and go check out Chimney Rock, because they're going to need it. And I am also in part with our Helene Relief merchandise efforts. I am going to try to put together a design that is Chimney Rock specific, and we're going to be donating every bit of the proceeds of our Helene merchandise line on ghostofthemountains.com. 100% of the proceeds of that will be going to the ongoing Helene disaster relief charities. That being said, Austin, dude, you are what I'm just going to start calling you the PRM, the paranormal research monster. Or something like that, dude, because every single time we do a show, you come in here with guns a-blazing with the stuff that you found. And I like the stuff that we breezed over a little bit before the show. I'm just like, I've never heard this stuff. And you're kind of blowing my mind as usual with this stuff.
Well, man, I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you.
Oh, absolutely, man. Coming from a guy that doesn't know how to research, what the hell? But yeah, man. So Chimney Rock, it's this giant natural monument made by Mother Earth. One thing that we didn't touch on and probably should have is we've speculated there was some sort of tectonic magma flow that was going on in that specific area.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of that here if you want to.
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely. Let's go into it.
Towering above the valley below like an ancient monolith, Chimney Rock is a natural granite rock formation perched atop a summit overlooking the Hickory Nut Gorge, Chimney Rock Village, and nearby Lake Lure. Geologists believe that the rock itself is over 535 million years old. Geological mapping found that Henderson gneiss underlies the mountains, hills, and valley in the region surrounding Chimney Rock. And because I wasn't really familiar with gneiss in general, looked that up, and that is gneiss spelled Gneiss, rock formation gneiss. It is a metamorphic rock made up of minerals such as quartz, feldspar, and biotite. This particular form of gneiss, Henderson gneiss, was named for the county which it was first discovered, and it's often formed from molten rock that cooled and solidified into granite deep underneath Earth's surface.
Nice.
Nice. Over time, heat and pressure transform the granite into gneiss. One of the common characteristics to be able to distinguish between the two is that gneiss has a almost stacked characteristic to it, a layered characteristic in its appearance. Although some signs and literature indicate that Chimney Rock is made of granite, it's widely become accepted that the rock is comprised of Henderson gneiss due to the layered characteristic displayed on the rock. So therefore, it's likely that weather erosion occurred throughout millions and millions of years, eventually causing the rock to become exposed over time as the soil around it eroded away. Essentially, this formation was formed underground, and erosion eventually occurred to expose it into the monolith that it is today.
Yeah, it doesn't look like granite to me.
No, it's nice.
It is nice. In fact, it's so nice, we're doing a whole podcast about it.
I do think there's a little bit of a common thread there we're already experiencing, with granite being involved in this. On our previous episodes, we touched on this. The Grove Park Inn, built from granite. Helen's Bridge, built from granite. Chimney Rock, formed from granite. Maybe there's just a lot of granite here, but it's an interesting little common thread there anyway.
Well, it's kind of interesting, too, when you talk to people that have come from all over and they're like, kind of, I don't know what to call them, but I'm just going to call them like geode chasers right now.
Yeah.
But, they're always talking about like the quartz and all that is like bringing the specific, whatever it is, energy, the spiritual energy to the area. And it's just like, I don't know. In Western North Carolina, there absolutely is a concentration of quartz in this area.
Yeah,
and
a high concentration.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that people tend to go here. We don't have the rockiest mountains in the world, but they are mineral rich, so there's that.
A lot of people touch on the healing properties of the mountains here. Get into that in a little bit, actually. So while a post office wasn't officially established in Chimney Rock Village until 1880, European settlers actually began establishing farming communities around the Hickory Nut Gorge as early as 1670. So for centuries before this, the land was inhabited by the Cherokee. The Cherokee honored and held this land sacred, believing that it possessed a spiritual significance. The first documented owner of Chimney Rock itself was Jerome B. Freeman, who reportedly purchased the monument with 400 acres of land from a speculation company for a ripe $25 in the late 1800s.
Damn, dude.
Yeah. I understand inflation's happened, but I want to say $25 in the late 1800s was still a pretty good deal for 400 acres.
Oh, yeah. He got the 400-acre wood. Winnie the Pooh was there. Or whatever, 100-acre.
100-acre, yeah.
It was 4 Winnie the Poohs there.
So Freeman eventually opened Chimney Rock up to the public in 1885. He later went on to build a staircase providing access to the top of the rock in 1891. He continued to operate the attraction until selling 64 acres of Chimney Rock Mountain, which included the monolith and the surrounding cliffs, to Dr. Lucius B. Morse for $5,000 in 1902. So he definitely he flipped that, made a little profit off that.
Like what? I'm like, what even is the percentage on that? That is ridiculous.
Yeah, between the late 1800s and 1902, not enough time had really passed to really appreciate the property that much.
Yeah, that's a businessman right there.
So Dr. Morse was a tourist that fell in love with Chimney Rock while visiting the area at the advice of his doctor for the healthy climate that we touched on. Another common thread with our boy E.W. Grove, what brought him to the area. So,
yep.
Speaking of those healing properties of the mountains. After purchasing the land in 1902, he began to expand Chimney Rock Park, buying hundreds of acres of surrounding land and building trails throughout the park. In 1946, plans were drawn up to have an elevator installed into the rock, which would transport visitors to the top of the rock. So it was blasted out of the solid granite cliff. The project took 8 tons of dynamite and 18 months to complete. Morrison and his family continued to expand the services and trails available at the park while placing a major emphasis on the preservation of plants and wildlife within the park. The area provides a habitat for rare flowers, diverse forest communities, and endangered species. So it's great that while it's a huge public attraction, it still has a ecologically friendly mission statement kind of tied to that as well. The park was purchased by the North Carolina government in 2007 and formally changed its name to Chimney Rock State Park. Over the last decade, the state has continued to add additional protected land and areas and trails to the park. And of course, as we mentioned, just last year in 2024, the park and Chimney Rock Village itself and the surrounding areas was severely damaged due to Hurricane Helene.
Yeah, just to give a little bit of a scope of how bad the damage was, and I think we've mentioned this on previous episodes, but if you weren't watching the news around the time that Helene happened, the number of downed trees and or damaged trees, they said, was 40% of the foliage. 40% of the overall foliage in western North Carolina and surrounding areas.
That is significant.
That is absolutely batshit crazy. And those videos that I was talking about of those guys flying over in those kind of gyrocopters, buddy, do you ever get a picture of that?
Oh, I bet. Yeah, and as we've mentioned, all of western North Carolina was impacted by this disaster, but there were certain areas that really took the brunt of the storm, and Chimney Rock is really at the forefront of that. There was a lot of media attention. No one could get in and out of the city. There was a lot of misinformation that spread throughout that doesn't need to be repeated, but just know that town and area has really been through it over the past few months.
I know. It is legitimately devastating to witness, and especially, I mean, I was there months before it was just destroyed, and just to paint a little bit of a picture of like how beautiful the little township is there. I mean, you got these kind of just like older little buildings, and they've done some really cool stuff with them. They set up, at the time before Helene, they had quite a few really, really awesome little restaurants right there around the entrance to the rock. One of my favorite places. I am an absolute nut for anything gemstones, just natural forming geodes and that sort of stuff. I cannot remember the name of the place, and I think that the building actually did survive, but there was one of the best gemstone stores I've ever been in right there, a little ways down the road on the left. If the entrance to the state park is on your right, it was just right there on the left there. That place had the best selection, man.
Nice.
It was such a bummer to see that, because I was just in there like months before this happens.
Yeah, I hate that. It makes you appreciate everything more. Like, I never really spent as much time at Lake Lure as I had hoped to, and that was kind of my biggest regret once I saw everything happening. My fiance had spent a lot of time out there at the Flowering Bridge area, and always described to me how magical it was to her. It was something that we'd always wanted to go to together, and now when that happened, I kind of found myself in that situation of like, man, never taking anything for granted again.
Oh, I know. And that's interesting, because I did walk across the Flower Bridge, and if you were familiar with the area at all, that was kind of one of the staples, because they had essentially turned this older bridge into a greenway there, right as soon as you kind of go into the Lake Lure area. And actually, me and the lovely lady Cheryl, my wife, we did get to hang out on the greenway one day, or on the flower walk there, and it was really cool, because there was just like this little beaver down in the water. He's just poking around doing his thing, and we just watched him for a while, and I was like, man, the simplicity of this moment is something I need like so much in my life.
Something that's probably going to stick with you forever now.
Yeah, dude.
So anyways, as we're touching on some of these, mystical characteristics of the area, we're going to get into some of the actual weird, borderline paranormal stories that have occurred in this area for hundreds of years. I think starting off with one of the most common stories of the area, we'll refer to it as the angelic procession above Chimney Rock. Is that what we're going with?
We're going with the angelic procession. That seems to be the term that everybody wants to use. And man, I have to say, I had never heard about this until you brought this story to my attention.
So I actually found this. There's this old book it's a state published book of just weird myths throughout North Carolina. They sell it at pretty much every state park or any public park in general.
Yeah.
I think I'd picked it up at Mount Mitchell years ago. So before I'd even visited Chimney Rock, I remember reading the story in there, and that's what sparked my interest on the area in general. So
yeah, man. I have spent so much time at this place. I'd been there a couple of times back in the day, but I really started going and staying like multiple weekends around 2016 and just kind of just really fell back in love with the place. I'd always thought it was so cool because like once you get into Lake Lure, you know, you have the historic inn there, and then across from that, there's like that island like right in the middle of the lake there. And it's so cool looking because it's like every single time you get there, it's like there's these mists and clouds floating around the island. It's just like you turn the corner and you are in a completely different place. Yeah, exactly. And I've always been down there with friends and we're like telling ghost stories and stuff at night. And I've always felt like there is just this kind of heaviness to the area. And now I'm finding there's like some substance to that
some history
feeling.
Here.
Yeah.
So let's get into this angelic procession here. This started on July 31st in 1806 when 8-year-old Elizabeth Reeves was enjoying the summer evening playing in the valley below Chimney Rock. She noticed an apparition of a pale man standing on the rock itself. Keep in mind, this is before any staircases or public access was available to the rock. So this is a pretty weird occurrence. Elizabeth went to alert her 11-year-old brother Morgan, who looked up to witness thousands of things flying in the air. They went back to their house, to their widowed mother, Patsy Reeves. She just believed her children were simply manufacturing a fantasy tale, but the siblings were insistent that they'd not only seen the man rolling bright white rocks down the side of the mountain and waving sticks, but had also seen, quote, a heap of people flying in the air. Accompanied by her 14-year-old daughter, Polly, Patsy Reeves approached the place that her children had been playing in an attempt to humor them and calm their excitement. As the evening breeze swept gently through the gorge, Patsy was startled by what she saw as she shaded her eyes with her hand and looked up at Chimney Rock. Along the ridge, the family viewed a numerous crowd of beings resembling the human species. The crowd of humanoid beings ranged in size, with some appearing to be the size of full-grown adults, while a majority of the beings were the size of infants, but they were all clad in a brilliant white raiment. Patsy eventually sent for her neighbor, Robert Searcy, who was skeptical of the whole occurrence at first, but eventually arrived to check out what was going on. And when he arrived, he found the enthralling activities of the white glowing ghost were far from over. The beings appeared to be flying or walking on the air around Chimney Rock. When all but a few had reached the rock, 2 seemed to rise together, and behind them a 3rd rose. These 3 then rose above the others and seemed to lead the unearthly congregation of shining beings up through the air, disappearing into the heavens. Searcy reported that when the entities vanished, he was left with a solemn and pleasing impression of the mind, although this was accompanied by a weakness of physical strength. Kind of an interesting side effect. This encounter remains unexplained to this day. Many argue that the sighting was just simply due to a mirage. A local reverend named George Newton interviewed both Patsy Reeves and Robert Searcy. Throughout his interview, he suggested that the Dance of the Spirits might have been a prelude to the descent of the Holy City. Sounds a little fire and brimstone for my taste. But this report from Mr. Newton was later published by the Raleigh Register and the State Gazette and has been reprinted by various other newspapers across the country since. So really digging into this, my biggest question was, finding the historical relevance of this. Were these real people? Were there records of them existing, living in the area at the time?
Yeah.
And of course, back in the early 1800s, census records were pretty sparse in these rural areas. It's, limited data collection measures, and a lot of areas, especially in these rural communities, just got skipped or left out. So unfortunately, there's no public record to corroborate the existence of Robert Searcy or the Reeves family. However, an abundance of public records do confirm the existence of George Newton, the reverend that recorded the interview and submitted it to the paper in the first place. He was actually a pretty big public figure, opened schools around the area, actually opened a school in the Asheville area at the site of where Mission Hospital currently stands. So, in my opinion, it's kind of unlikely that this well-known community figure who was, a man of God would falsify the story or the existence of these experiencers in general. So,
unless he was trying to drum up more interest in the church.
I just don't see how there's a tie into that, but maybe so.
I mean, that's just going on the fly. Now, is that portion essentially done?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think the only thing I'm just going to touch on there is, technically due to the description of this event could technically be classified as an early report of unidentified flying objects.
That's literally what I was going to say. Is like, okay, so seemingly there have been reports of UFO, UAP, whatever the hell you want to, whatever acronym you want, baby, we got them on tap. But there have apparently been sightings of these things dating back all the way to like Alexander the Great and stuff like that. Or at least that is speculated.
Yeah, pre-craft UFOs.
Absolutely, yeah. Pre-Wright brothers.
Yeah.
We'll claim that one because, North Carolina represent. But when you look at some of the things that they're talking about there, I mean, some of that, I don't want to say is like textbook UAP encounter, but it's pretty damn close.
There's a lot of common threads for sure.
Well, I mean, like anomalous lights in the sky. The thing that stood out to me was loss of strength. Okay.
Yeah, that was the other one.
See, this is really interesting to me because, dude, how many times have you heard a story about some sort of UFO where this is the specific thing that always sticks out to me in these stories that they always say they come out, they have some sort of little rod or stick looking thing in their hand. They point it at said person and they are completely paralyzed and they can't even move. And not to mention, over the years, I think even dating back to like Betty and Barney Hill, yes, if you've never heard of that case, their names were Betty and Barney Hill. So many people have experienced like physical symptoms.
Exactly.
In whenever they have experienced some sort of, post contact with some sort of UAP. So that to me, in a way, does sound very suspect and very, very similar to what we have kind of like come to know as a typical UAP encounter.
I would agree with that.
And not to just poo-poo on the idea that it was some sort of potentially like spiritual and or ghostly apparition. And also, we always try to keep one foot in science. I mean, there is all kinds of strange atmospheric anomalies that happen that look very, very odd. I am still finding things on the internet that I didn't know occurred. I think that there is a pretty rare occurrence. Maybe I'm saying the wrong thing, but have you ever heard of something called like red sprites, I think they're called?
I don't know if I have, honestly.
I might be saying this wrong, but they're essentially like this kind of lightning formation. They don't look exactly like typical lightning, but they typically have like a red tint to them.
Oh, interesting.
And I had only recently found out about this. I don't know anything about this other than just like the very quick blurb that I saw of this. But again, it's kind of like that and what are also commonly referred to as sun dogs, which are also these just kind of essentially they're like these kind of prismatic looking spots in the sky, and they're typically rather small as compared to a giant football field sized spaceship flying in the air. But yeah, again, there's all kinds of different stuff like that. And at the time, there's all kinds of different interpretations of what that could be. So I digress. I will let you get back into the awesomeness. I think next on the thing, though, is even stranger and a little bit more our beat, what is called the Ghost Army.
Yeah, correct.
Tell us all about this thing, man.
So these strange apparitions appearing above Chimney Rock didn't just stop with the angelic procession. A short 5 years later, in 1811, another unearthly spectacle of ghostly entities occurred over Chimney Rock. As reported by writer Silas McDowell, an elderly farm couple witnessed the spirited specter battle of Chimney Rock involving two opposing armies of soldiers, all high up in the air mounted on winged horses. As the cry of charge was heard echoing through the gorge, the two ghost cavalries dashed at each other, cutting, thrusting, and hacking. They fought for about 10 minutes when one army was routed and left the field. The shouts of victors and wails of the defeated were heard plainly, soon after which darkness hid both armies from view. McDowell reported that the mounted cavalrymen were seen on subsequent evenings, but not engaged in battle this time. He further claimed that he located 3 additional respectable witnesses of the same phenomenon from their houses, and he further claimed that he located 3 additional witnesses of the same phenomenon that witnessed this ghost battle occurring from their houses in the valley below Chimney Rock. Silas McDowell himself was reportedly a bit of a skeptic, didn't really believe in ghost or paranormal experiences in general, but many years later, he ended up trying to offer his own explanation for the ghostly battle that he had reported on. He claimed that in autumn, when the atmosphere of the ravine is clear before a change in the weather, the lower atmosphere of the ravine is charged with vapor. Seen through this medium, the vapor acts with a telescopic effect and swells the size of a bunch of gnats that are at play in the sun's ray to the appearance of the squadron of winged horses. So, I mean, that seems like a bit of a stretch to go from gnats being magnified in the vapor and sunlight to actually seeing a detailed cavalry battle and actually hear the clashing of swords, the sounds coming from this battle. I don't know if that's really the best skeptical explanation. Understand you want to keep one foot in the skeptic realm, but that one just seems like you're reaching a little bit there.
Well, you see, Austin, what that actually was swamp gas that was being reflected off the light of Venus.
Yes.
That old bullshit. Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. The thing that's really odd to me about it is like the visceral interpretation of the sounds of the swords clashing and stuff.
Yeah, and the verbal, like, reportedly heard someone shout charge right before the battle started. So it seems that, either something was really in their head or they actually witnessed something pretty weird. So there's a lot of other assessments on that. Many people disagree with Mr. McDowell's assessment. But actually, a public meeting was actually held shortly after this event in the nearby town of Rutherfordton to discuss this aerial battle. The attendees concluded that the battle was a divine vision. It was believed to represent a space-time warp, revealing highlights of the not-too-distant Revolutionary War. Seems about as far-fetched as the Nat theory, but sure, if it makes people feel better, then let's go with it.
I don't know, man. I mean, like, I kind of like this idea a little bit because it's kind of a loaded theory, but it's kind of like this whole thing of where, I'll just say it this way. We do not know everything there is to be known about science. We do not understand everything there is to be understood about how gravity, magnetism, time, all of these things, the fabric of the universe, we do not fundamentally understand how they work. We have theories. We have theories that are being challenged all the time.
Yep.
I think that the further our artificial intelligence grows and the more that we kind of are able to uncover things with that, I think that a lot more of these things are going to kind of start to come into focus for us. But I think it's honestly pretty incredible that they were like, oh, it's some sort of temporal dilation.
Right. I think
like,
for the
that's
time.
Pretty badass.
Yeah, that's a pretty, scientifically, I don't want to say sound theory, but, it had some basis in scientific rooting for the time period especially.
I agree with you, man. That's kind of where I'm landing with it. I'm like, man, I think that's pretty dope that these people all were like, yeah, I think the best explanation is potentially some sort of like time dilation.
Right.
I find that so fascinating.
And that was what the town hall meeting concluded. They all got together. There'd been, I'm sure this story traveled word of mouth pretty quick, and the experiencers, wanted to share this and talk about it with anyone else, share theories. And it is interesting that the whole town kind of gathered and landed on this theory.
That's awesome. It just shows how awesome that town apparently has always been.
So there have been some other theories. Some have even drawn a link between this battle and Charles Fort's fascinating book, New Lands, where he reported numerous sightings of phantom soldiers between the mid-1700s and late 1800s. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Charles Fort, I'd say he's kind of the forefather of paranormal. I think people use his last name in a term that's kind of interchangeable with the term paranormal, supernatural. A lot of people that might not necessarily want to include themselves in that realm, kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, will refer to themselves as Fortean researchers as opposed to paranormal researchers, which I think is kind of an interesting title.
To me, it's kind of the slightly more sophisticated way to say, I'm into weird shit.
Exactly. So I do think it's cool that there is a tie between this battle and, the godfather of paranormal. But these sightings that Charles Fort had really been reporting in his book, New Lands, these mainly occurred in the British Isles, but that was really the original homeland of many of the state's early settlers, so another interesting little connection there. In his book, Fort suggested that our general acceptance is that all reports upon such phenomenon are colored in terms of appearance and subjects uppermost in our minds. It appears that the era of phantom soldier sightings ultimately diffused to and possibly marched through the mountains of western North Carolina.
I mean, with all the craziness that seems to happen in these mountains, let's just throw that in there.
Why not?
Yeah, that in the kitchen sink.
So the two documented accounts of, let's call them ghostly entities of Chimney Rock, lead even skeptical minds to consider the possibility that something supernatural might be occurring here.
It's so funny because when we look at this area in a broad sense, it's almost impossible to look at Chimney Rock and not think of Lake Lure also being, part of that. I mean, it's all kind of one thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're a rock's throw away from Lake Lure.
Yeah, exactly. And, like I was kind of talking a little bit about at the beginning of the podcast, I've spent a ton of time at Lake Lure. It is literally one of my absolute favorite places on the planet to be. And I had always been down there on some dock of whatever house I was staying at. I would, rent an Airbnb just to get away and just go hang out down there at least 1 or 2 weekends a year. Mm-hmm. And every single time I would be down there on a dock in the middle of the night. And dude, that is one of my favorite things, is just being down on a dock by the lake in the middle of the night, the moon coming out over the place. It's just so serene up there. You have hardly any cell phone service.
I could feel the tranquility just off your description. Like, I'm mentally there right now.
Dude. Oh, me too. Yeah. I'm just thinking about the last time I was there, and I'm just, I'm on the dock. It's just big towering pine trees, just gorgeous, man. I like literally one of the most beautiful places ever. But every single time I'm in one of those situations, there is just always an unspoken, what I will just call a little bit of a creepy feeling down there. And, it's nighttime. I'm into this stuff. Maybe I think a bit about it more than the average bear, paranormal. But I have come to realize in researching a little bit about Lake Lure and Chimney Rock for the podcast that I've actually had a little bit of some odd synchronicities with this area. Now, we're not going to go too much into Lake Lure because we've found a lot more stuff.
That's its own separate episode.
Yeah, we're going to have to do our own thing. But to spearhead that episode, I'll just go ahead and tell you. When you drive into Lake Lure, obviously you are surrounded by the beautiful rocky mountains surrounding the lake. And one of the most prominent things that you see when you come into that first little strip is the great big magical looking Lake Lure Inn. And I don't know exactly what year it was built, but it's older. It's been there a minute. Well, when I was scouring the internet for information about Lake Lure, apparently there's been some pretty massive hauntings that have been going on at the Lake Lure Inn. So I says to Austin, dude, it's right up the road. If you can get into Lake Lure from Rutherfordton, and we can essentially get there via the highway, as long as they're open sometime soon, I think it would be interesting if we just go there, we stay the night, we do some little paranormal investigation of our own, talk to some of the people that, have worked there and potentially experienced some of this stuff. I'm super excited about the prospect of that. But we are going to do a deep dive into that. We are going to go boots on the ground, field research, old school style.
Lemur style
investigation. If you haven't heard the past 2 episodes, when he says lemur style, no, we are not going to be dressed up like the Bloodhound Gang and roll in there in monkey suits. Lemur is an acronym for the League of Energy Materialization and Unexplained Phenomena with a silent P. After all these years, it still trips me up. And it was a paranormal group that I was a part of back in the day where we did a lot of field investigations. So we're going to be pulling out some of the tricks. Dude, I don't know that they would say anything. I don't think that we could damage anything. But I did think about buying a Wimshurst generator.
Ooh, okay.
And bringing that and just running it in the room.
Yeah.
And just see if that does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Ionize the atmosphere and potentially make it to where we could take some better paranormal photographs. But I digress. That is going to be an episode, and I'm very much looking forward to not only just the adventure of being able to go, but then the subsequent episode and being able to bring you our findings. However, while I have been at Lake Lure back in the day, just hanging out there, enjoying it, and I'll try to make this a little short because we're running long, but hey, who cares? The more of us to love. So one of my first experiences with Lake Lure, I ended up going with a friend to a bonfire with some people that I had never met before. And I'm not going to say any names. There's nothing incriminating. They were all very, very sweet people, but I just don't know that they would want to be brought up on the podcast. But very, very, very sweet, awesome people. When I get to this house, it is a beautiful scene. Giant bonfire in the backyard. There are people in kilts. There are people playing the Celtic drum known as the baran. I think there's somebody there with bagpipes, and they're all out there just playing. It is magical. It's like I transported into the Shire, And I think, I definitely did go there when I was a teenager, but this was like the first time that I had been there in years. And end up there, we're all sitting around the fire. Weird paranormal stuff starts to come up because, I've always got one foot in that. And these people start telling me that there's a lake monster in Lake Lure. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, that's interesting. I like that there's some lore about that. I had heard about similar lake monsters in areas like Lake James, which is down near Morganton and or Nebo, North Carolina. I always love saying Nebo. And Drexel, that's another name in North Carolina. I'm like, damn, that needs to be a bad guy in a comic book, maybe one day.
Nebo sounds like it'd be a cryptid.
I feel like Nebo sounds like it should be a snack cake.
That too, the cryptid snack cake.
Yeah, here's little old Nebo. But man, well, there you go. There starts our snack product line, the Nebo Bebo. So I thought that was really interesting. I had heard a lot of stories about lake monsters essentially being really big-ass catfish. I had gone fishing with a wonderful human being named John Anderson. And if you ever listen to 570 WWNC, The Talk of the Mountains, if you ever heard the voice of the mountains, there was a very low, awesome voice, and he voiced commercial after commercial after commercial over the years That's my buddy, Big John Anderson. And John, if you somehow are listening to this, love you, man, miss you. And he and I would just go nighttime fishing, and he would tell me these stories about in Lake James, there would be these catfish the size of Volkswagens. And buddies that owned tow trucks always had these ideas where they were going to go put one of those giant like ninja grappling hook looking things on the back of like a tow truck with the big steel reinforced line. Put like 3 whole chickens on that thing, drop that thing in there and see if one of them Volkswagen catfish would bite it. Now, I like that story. Are they down there? I don't know that they're Volkswagen size. I know that scuba divers have seen things like that have kind of freaked them a little bit out. I hope there are Volkswagen-sized catfish down there. That would be very awesome. Now, I don't discount the idea that something like that does exist in Lake Lure because, you know, you can introduce that kind of species because that is a man-made lake.
Yeah.
You can introduce that kind of species in there, and God knows how big they can get. They can get very, very large. But as I was digging around on the internet today, I was looking for one thing and found another because I was just looking for any sort of information about a lake monster at Lake Lure. I think the whole premise of the thing is kind of hysterical because it is a man-made lake. It's like, they put the monster in there 15 years later, you see. But one thing I did find that was kind of interesting is that supposedly when the lake was being filled in, when it was first created, this was just, you know, your typical mountain area as far as the flora and fauna goes. So the story is that the snakes all essentially were displaced, and there was kind of this big flock murder. I don't know what you call them. I think murder works. There was just like a huge exodus of snakes that were trying to get out of the area as the lake was filling up. And one of the areas in which they started to reside was what is called Yacht Island, which is essentially in the middle of Lake Lure. Now, I personally have actually stayed right up the road from Yacht Island multiple times. It's genuinely a beautiful spot. And actually, there's a little bridge that joins the island to the rest of the area. And it is one of the best views rather than being out on like a pontoon on the lake. It is absolutely stunning. And the weird thing that I found was when some friends of mine and I would be staying down there, we would get whatever kayaks were at the Airbnb and like, all right, we're going to go conquest out into the lake there, try not to get hit by a boat. And so we get to Yacht Island and I find this literally a little beach there. And so I get out of my little kayak thing and I, put my oar in the ground and I'm like, this is Rattlesnake Island. I find out that I have been calling Yacht Island Rattlesnake Island for literally years.
Without knowing that was a refuge for...
Never heard a single thing about that until today. So...
Wild.
Yeah. So I don't know why my mind went to any island at Lake Lure is Rattlesnake Island, but then this is the dominant. This is Rattlesnake Island.
And it actually was.
When I found out that thing was called Snake Island, I was like, okay, well, there's just this odd synchronicity, just another one of those strange parallels.
Tapped into something there.
But anyway, I will digress because we are going to do an entire episode about Lake Lure, the surrounding lore, and our paranormal investigation of the inn there. Look up some pictures of this place. It is gorgeous. I cannot wait to check this out. But I am going to now pass it back to the guy that's got actual interesting information other than just, his flight of fancy paranormal occurrences and strange synchronicities. Buddy, what is the next strange area joining with this whole thing?
So the next area I want to talk about is known as the Hickory Nut Gorge. It's an area that's actually within the Chimney Rock State Park land, but it has a lot of historical weirdness to it, just old folk tales that, kind of tie into the paranormal here. So we're going to start off with this one here that I refer to as the Witch of Hickory Nut Gorge.
Oh boy, this
I didn't find this until literally 2 days ago, so this one was all new to me as well.
I know that there is some kind of, when we're talking about like the Bell Witch of Tennessee, that some of that stuff does get kind of tenuous, although the lore itself, the stories are really, really fun. This shit better not turn into that, because that stuff is, the lore itself, I'm just saying, is kind of spooky.
Yeah. And of course, like witches appear throughout American and European myths pretty consistently, but a lot of people believe that they're fictional characters, when in fact, they're pretty real in every sense of the word. Just might not be the typical Witches of the Children story that you're used to seeing with, the black pointy hats or the pointed noses or any of that.
Or the turning kids into gingerbread.
Yeah, of course. all the common tropes. But these witches were mostly women who were different from the fundamentalist mentality of early America. Naturally, these women were persecuted as they did not fit the standard Christian viewpoint. The Hickory Nut Gorge had its own resident witch by the name of Nancy Ann Ashworth. We'll refer to her as Anne moving forward. I believe that's what she went by. Anne was a self-trained natural doctor from the time she was a little girl. Western North Carolina is home to more plants and herbs used in medicine than any other place in the United States. As early as the 1770s, botanists began visiting the mountains to gather medicinal plants. Anne Ashworth knew them all and used them in her role as a healer. Diseases caused by the supernatural needed supernatural healing, and early modern medicine was full of magic. From the alchemical pursuit of the mythical philosopher's stone to the pervasive belief in astrology's influence in all aspects of life and health, Western medicine of the period was intertwined with magic. Therefore, it's not difficult to see why healers could sometimes find themselves on the accused side of witch trials, especially when the practitioners were female. Most religious neighbors disparaged Anne's spells and incantations, but they actually seemed to work with healing properties, and even the righteous swallowed their pride and visited her when they were ill. Not surprisingly, Anne was considered a very worldly woman of her day. She drank, she wore lace, frills on her petticoats. She was a tough businesswoman. She cast spells, cursed people who crossed her, and did as she pleased with no regard to what anyone thought.
Maybe she set the blueprint for what was going on with like culture with, Wiccans in the early 90s of Asheville,
Early Appalachian witchcraft there.
Sure.
So more than once, Anne was brought up on charges by King Creek, now Fairview Baptist Church. She responded by threatening to curse those who charged her. Since her curses nearly always seemed to work, her accusers tended to back down at the last minute. These men were so afraid of her powers that they reconsidered and reduced the charges against her to the crime of wearing ruffled petticoats.
Damn, yo. Man, they got her.
Not quite the spooky witch lore that we were kind of hinting at, but I think that's a pretty funny story regardless.
Tell you what, man. Gosh. Think that the people would you feel like people get on your case nowadays. It's like, damn, couldn't even wear frills.
Right? Or, be a decent doctor without being accused of witchcraft because you're a woman.
Yeah, well, I mean, oh God, that's the thing. I was in Salem last year. I was in Salem weeks before Helene hit.
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, a week before Helene hit.
Yeah.
Legit.
It was that weekend.
Oh, actually, no, it was within 24 freaking hours of Helene hitting, essentially, that I was in Salem. And man, I mean, we were like at one of the museums there where they do a dramatization of essentially how the just extremist religious outlook. And I mean, you're sitting there watching, the things they're accusing other people of and the wild shit that just surrounded the whole thing. We can get into that at some other point, but I'm just saying it's like, dude, different time.
For sure. And it's wild. Of course, you hear the Salem trials pretty commonly. I think that goes hand in hand, but it is kind of cool. Maybe not cool is the right word, but it's wild to think about these trials were basically happening in our backyard too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's just one of those things where it's like, if you personally have never really read up that much on it, you hear the Salem witch trials and you're like, yes, I know this. But if you haven't ever really done a deep dive or looked into it, I think it's a pretty good eye-opener for everyone to at least take a little bit of time to look into that stuff. Because, man, that was just the bizarre nature of it all. And then also just the
historical significance of it.
Well, and the way that people were punished and the way that people were treated. Like, we did a tour of the Dungeon Museum. And, dude, some of these, cells, quote-unquote cells that they had there, they were like upright coffins that were built into the wall, made out of stone, where you literally couldn't do anything but stand up.
That's a torture chamber.
It was absolutely freaking horrific.
I could imagine.
Yeah. So anyway.
We're going to continue on with more stories from the Hickory Nut Gorge. As we mentioned earlier, the Cherokee really ascribed a deep spiritual significance to the land around Chimney Rock and the Hickory Nut Gorge in general. They believed that this area was inhabited by mythic beasts and spirits, most noticeably the Yunwe Junsti, which are often referred to as the Cherokee Little People. They are a human-looking spirit of nature that reveals themselves as a small, childlike creature. Allegedly, they are usually invisible, but reveal themselves to humans from time to time. Legend has it that you will need to be careful to not disrespect or show aggression towards them or nature, as they will use their powers to punish you. Cherokee legends of the Unwe share similarities with European tales of fairies and the Fae in general. The Cherokee described them as little fellows, hardly reaching up to a man's knee, but well-shaped and handsome, with long hair falling to the ground. They're very fond of music, spending a lot of their time drumming and dancing. However, the little people did not like to be disturbed at home, and are said to cast spells over intruders, leaving them bewildered and confused. Hickory Nut Gorge was allegedly one of these places that the little people considered their home and were very protective over. They wielded many magical powers to expel trespassers. For the Cherokee, a journey through the gorge was essential for bringing back the tobacco that the whole tribe craved. A lot of spiritual significance was also ascribed to this crop. According to legend, a wandering stranger from the east had first introduced tobacco to the Cherokee long, long ago, and they'd grown quite fond of smoking the sacred herb from their large stone pipes. When the Cherokee's supply of tobacco started to dwindle, they were anxious to obtain more. This herb of the distant past was not the common tobacco that you think of in, your common times that you go and buy, whether that's in cigarettes or chewing tobacco, I don't know the other types, but this was actually a wild form of tobacco referred to as Nicotina rustica, which I believe was a little more potent, and they believe to have some spiritual significance too as well.
Man, that is a cool word, or a cool phrase. Nicotina rustica. I love that so much.
That should be a cigarette brand.
Dude, that should be a side band.
That too.
Well, it kind of reminds me of Chris Thile and the Punch Brothers record, Anti-Fogmatic. Have you ever heard of I'm sure you probably have in the alcohol world, a booze or a beer or a spirit known as an anti-fogmatic?
Yeah.
One of the coolest words of all time. I digress.
Cool album title, too.
Hell yeah.
The Cherokee used this plant for many ritual and medicinal purposes. They used it as a sacred incense and as a guarantee of any solemn oath that was taken between parties. And they also used it as a means for seeking omens and driving away evil spirits. So this was really not just a kind of habit or hobby for them. This was a part of life. This was a way of life for the Cherokee people. So,
dude, I can't not say it. It wasn't a habit. It wasn't a hobby. It was a hobbit. I am so sorry. I am ejecting myself from the podcast right now. Austin, please continue.
Traveling from the mountains to the flatlands where tobacco grew in abundance was no easy task for the Cherokee. The Hickory Nut Gorge was one of the few passes to the east and the most direct route to finding the plant. Unfortunately, the gorge was constantly guarded by a multitude of little people and other spirit beings. According to legend, one young man determined to prove himself stepped forward to volunteer to retrieve tobacco for the tribe. Full of confidence, the young warrior departed, only never to return. With their stores of tobacco almost extinguished, the elders reconvened to come up with a plan to find more of the crop. This time, a clever conjurer rose to offer his services, promising that he would find a way to bring back tobacco and satisfy the demand for the weed. The sorcerer first tried turning himself into a mole, a ploy which almost succeeded until the guardian spirits detected him tunneling and chased him back home. Next, the sorcerer turned himself into a hummingbird, threading his way through the gorge. In this form, he was able to pass through the gorge, but was only able to carry a tiny little amount of tobacco back with him. So, convinced that he was able to have success and convinced that he could do better, the sorcerer vowed to avenge the loss of the young warrior and to gain sole possession of the tobacco growing beyond the gorge. This time, he turned himself into a whirlwind. Spinning violently through the Hickory Nut Gorge, the whirlwind stripped the mountain of vegetation, scattered huge boulders up and down the rivers and streams, and exposed the rock cliffs still visible from Hickory Nut Gorge to Chimney Rock and Lake Lure. So, kind of an interesting take on how some of those rock cliffs and the rock itself got exposed there.
Yeah.
The whirlwind was so intense that the little people fled, hiding in caves and fissures throughout Hickory Nut Gorge. Some believe that there is a connection between the little people and the humanoid entities observed above Chimney Rock in the early 1800s. Free from the interference of the spirit guards, the sorcerer searched and searched until he found the bones of the young warrior in the riverbed and brought him back to life. The two of them returned to their home in the mountains, heavily laden with tobacco. Ever since that time, tobacco has been plentiful throughout the land of the Cherokee.
Man, it's really interesting when you're talking about this kind of lore that is centered around the shape-shifting aspect.
Yeah.
Because I am a bit of a gamer, because I am fascinated with the craft of video game development. And one of the games that was very, very prominent throughout 2024 was a game called Black Myth Wukong.
I am not familiar.
So it essentially goes into the lore of the journey to the West. It's the kind of the ancient Chinese story, the tale of the Monkey King. I think the most popularized version of that in American pop culture is essentially Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah,
it's the story of Goku. But the main telling of that most people would be familiar with is Journey to the West. There's been a million different renditions of it for, as long as you can even remember. But there are very distinct parallels between kind of what you're talking about there with the shape shifting and kind of what goes on in some of the mythology of the Journey to the West or Black Myth Wukong, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
But when you kind of start talking about this concept of the little people there.
This is a recurring topic that comes up time and time and time again through Western North Carolina, specifically Cherokee myths, legends, and lore.
And it's also been something that like you and I have really kind of, we've just found ourselves having discussions about this before we started the podcast time and time again.
I feel like every time we got together for a few drinks, this topic would definitely come up.
Yeah, it was like no matter what we were talking about that night, it would kind of always land there and come back to it. And let me first off say, my Hobbit comment, I am 1,000,000% serious when I say, I mean that is absolutely no disrespect, because I'm always kind of trying to keep one foot in science and everything that we can perceive in the natural world and be like, yes, this, as far as we can tell, is factual. However, it has been something I've been debating in my mind for a very, very long time, if maybe some of this stuff about the little people is not just folklore.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is because I personally know two people, knew two people that had seen them with their very own eyes and told me all about it. But that, I think, is something that we're gonna have to spend a little bit more time on, because we ain't got enough hours in the day.
Yep. This is gonna be a multiple part topic that we dig into on this. There's so many different avenues and really areas to explore on this.
You really ain't kidding when it comes to that stuff. I mean, I think the thing that is so awesome to me, not just that there's potential that there is actually like little people living essentially in our backyard here in Western North Carolina, but it's the same kind of idea of like, okay, well, if they are there, we don't see them very often, so they hide pretty well. So how are they doing that?
Right.
And then that leads up for me of like, look, there's still some mystery to the planet, man.
For sure.
There's still some mystery of the world here.
I mentioned this to you. I found myself out in Cherokee, North Carolina for work last week. Knew we were going to be covering this topic. So on my lunch break, I actually went to the museum there in Cherokee, kind of explained what we were looking into with little people and the specific occurrence around Chimney Rock and the Hickory Nut Gorge. And I think people were nice about it, but kind of kept to themselves a little bit, at least the people working at the museum. After I'd walked through, looked at the exhibits, went back to the front desk and was talking to him and started to open up a little bit more, tell me some things. And one thing that the woman at the front desk said that stuck with me was that our elders can be very protective of our little people. But if you talk to the right people, there are some that will be willing to share some interesting tidbits with you. From there, she kind of gave me a few tips on people to talk to within the community, and really thought that was interesting. And one of the things that she left me with was, if you do encounter the little people, just be nice to them.
Man. Well, I will just say, that's just another little breadcrumb that leads me to believe that maybe there is something really to this whole thing. Well, that being said, thank you so much again for tuning in to Ghosts in the Mountains. This has been our third episode. I have had a blast. Austin, dude, again, you are a monster with the research, buddy.
I appreciate that. Means a lot, man. Making me blush over here.
Dude, every single time that we sit down to do one of these things, you're bringing something else to the table that's just like blowing my mind. It's probably because I don't read good and you do. And, you're a superpower here, buddy. But yeah, man, I think we have at least shed a little bit of light or put the spotlight on Chimney Rock and a little bit of Lake Lure, which we're going to go into later. But Chimney Rock, to tie it all together, is a truly, truly spectacular place. And you really have to go there and experience it for yourself, because pictures don't do it justice. It's just something that you have to see.
Something you have to feel. It's something you feel in the atmosphere.
You are completely right. You do have to feel that. So rent an Airbnb, go find a doc, tell some spooky stories, give back to the community that needs you as soon as their doors are open. And here is hoping that Chimney Rock comes back even stronger than it was before. But that being said, I think we're going to call it a night with the third episode here of the Ghosts in the Mountains podcast. I am your host, Caleb Hanks. I am here with my good buddy, the research monster, Mr. Austin Burgess. Austin, I hope you've had a good time. I've had a good time listening to everything you brought to the table tonight, buddy.
Oh, yeah, it's been a great evening. Looking forward to next week.
All right. And with that, thank you all so much. If you want to find out more, please go to ghostsinthemountains.com. We do have merchandise there. That is essentially one of the ways that the podcast is, supported and how we're able to do this. And then also we have a line that is specific to the Hurricane Helene relief here in town, and 100% of the proceeds of all sales of that line of merchandise will be going to charities to help people that are affected by the hurricane. So thank you all so much again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Ghosts in the Mountains.